Hey guys, I'm gonna try a little something different when recording this video. I'm gonna try to read off this little short essay that I wrote. So I'm gonna try to do this one take because I feel like it could save time and it could make my topic feel more persuasive and natural. So I'm just gonna go ahead and begin here. If I make any mistakes, I apologize in advance. So what I wanted to talk about was what should Battlefield 1 competitive game mode be? Um, it's a kind of a broad question, but in terms, think of it like this: Counter-Strike Global Offensive, its main game mode is defuse, right? So what should the main game mode of Battlefield 1 competitive be? Um, so I wanted to start off with what Battlefield is known for. So everyone knows that Battlefield is known for a 64-player shit show, right? It's been that way since Battlefield 1942. That's just the bread and butter of Battlefield. Battlefield was never really known as a competitive first-person shooter. It wasn't really thought of as like that. You just kind of sit down, you play, shoot down vehicles, whatever. Um, it's never really been known like CS:GO or Unreal Tournament or Quake as very skilled based movement and aim. So Battlefield at its core, super large scaled infantry, ground vehicles, and air vehicles, all combined at once, just one pot of crap. Um, Even when it's basic infantry gameplay, it still has different varieties like different classes of soldiers working together. You got your medic, you got your support, you got an engineer. They're all working together to bring benefits to the team. You got one dude bringing health, you got one dude bringing ammo, you got one dude bringing all the firepower, you got one dude making spotting enemies, making sure you know where they are. Um, you kind of get the same thing with vehicles, and it's just great. That's how Battlefield is known. Just all just this giant soup of just so many. I would say, many features crammed into one. Um, so because this was the main staple, this is what Battlefield is known for. Early Battlefield tournaments, searching all the way back to like Battlefield 2, was normally 8v8 conquest at its that's basically what it was. It was just small AVA conquests. It wasn't really professional teams per se, but it was more like communities and small teams just kind of playing some other community-hosted events. This was considered like the best competitive game mode in Battlefield at the moment, since it was true to the name. It was conquest small. It was you had your vehicles, you got air vehicles, you had helicopters, stuff like that. That was you got your infantry, captain flags. It was great. But it wasn't until Battlefield 3 came around that more infantry-focused gameplay came along. Battlefield 3 at the time was probably the fastest battlefield. It had really fast TTK. It had fast soldier movement. It was a lot more modern based, since the previous battlefields were a bit more slow. And Battlefield 3 was definitely something new and refreshing to Battlefield, which is why it sold so well. It was unique from any other Battlefield at the time, and so the meta in Battlefield 3 was fast and accurate. You had the M16A3 meta, which is basically a laser beam once you got used to the recoil, which wasn't that hard, and it was just there was no spread, and damage drop off wasn't really a huge hindrance to the M16A3. So it was just people would shoot for very high accuracy in rounds, shoot for like 40% accuracy, which is something very hard to get in Battlefield 4 or any other Battlefield game since. Um, but it heavily rewarded players that were fast with their movement and fast with their gameplay. Um, but because of this fast-paced infantry gameplay mixed with a competitive setting didn't really work out too well. In a 5v5 small conquest setting in Battlefield 3, it was pretty mundane. It was pretty boring because it was the same five medics, the same M16A3 being used. I mean, you could use like an A94 and an AK, but it's kind of like why when you could just use the M16A3. It was kind of bland and mundane, and this is just the fault of toning down Battlefield to an infantry only setting, which is not really what Battlefield is. It's like making CS:GO like 1v1 only. Just doesn't make sense. So Battlefield 3 5v5 Conquest Small was was mostly the competitive game mode. You know, 5v5 was mostly the main staple in competitive. You know, you had like 5v5, Conquest Mall, and Grand Bazaar, or stuff like that. Um, but it was a small player account, mostly because real money was getting involved. Not just, you know, like $50 per tournament. It was more like a couple hundred, maybe $1,000 per tournament. There was organizations spending money on Battlefield 3 tournaments and sponsorships of teams. And it was more economically viable to sponsor 5 players rather than a large team of 8. Some of you may ask why. It's pretty simple. But it's just a lot more economically viable to sponsor 5 players. It's easier to find 5 players. Excuse me. It's easier to communicate with 5 players. Easier to get along with. Easier to pay since you have to pay the players a lot less. It's easier to coach 5 players, and it's just uh, you could represent 5 players much better. This becomes increasingly difficult and not economically viable the higher the player count goes. You know, in AV8, you need to find 8 players. You need to find, you know, a couple of good infantry players. You need to find a couple of good vehicle players, and they were not the same vehicles were used on every single map. Some maps use helicopters, some use jets, some maps only use tanks. Plus, you had to add extra players as well because it's not very easy if you were in, you know, competitive AV8 or 10v10. You know the struggles of having to of players not showing up when they're supposed to. So you always had a ton of backups. You always had, you know, like 10 infantry players, you know, and you always had like 2 or 3 tank players or 2 or 3 jet players or 2 or 3, you know, helicopter players because some players just couldn't make it. You know, you're making time to play a video game. You know, so many people didn't put that on their agenda list. You know, oh, prepare to come home to work today to play a video game because I need to. They much rather spend it on going out, you know, out of town with friends or something like that. So there's a ton of extras. So it was more than just 8 players on a team playing 8v8. There were 16 players, you know, 20 players, all, you know, all on their A or B teams, stuff like that. But in a 5v5 setting, all you really needed was just 5 players. I mean, you could have an extra or 2, but in reality, there's a ton of teams with only 5 players, and it was just easy to keep track of. But you know, many competitive shooters have like a 5 versus 5 thing. League of Legends, Dota, Counter Strike, Rainbow Six, ton of other games that I'm just not mentioning. Halo, I think Gears of War. I'm not sure. Maybe Gears of War is a 4v4. Call of Duty is 4v4 for sure. But you know what I'm getting at. So, you know, it makes a lot of sense for developers who want to do, you know, something competitive to kind of do the standard 5 versus 5 players. You know, that's just kind of the staple of, you know, competitive video games. You know, unless your game's unique, of course, like Rocket League, which is 3v3, and World of Tanks, which is 7v7. Um, but the real problem is that Battlefield is not Battlefield in a 5v5 setting. You know, you can't experience Battlefield in a 5v5 domination or in a 5v5 squad obliteration. It's just Battlefield does not feel Battlefield. It just feels like more refined Call of Duty. Um, Not that Battlefield and Call of Duty are alike, but I'm trying to make this understandable for you guys. So I already mentioned in the beginning that vehicles and infantry class diversity is the fundamentals of Battlefield. If you ask anyone if you ask anyone who knows what Battlefield is, they'll always tell you infantry and vehicle gameplay, just large-scale battles. And if you try to make Battlefield an esport by stripping away these features in the game to balance it out, you're gonna have a very poor and lackluster esport that will never really appear to the community at large. So as you can see here, I'm showing off an old battle log post of the last ESL 1 Grand Finals, and this was when Epsilon took the cake. As you can see here, a lot of the comments, a lot of people just do not relate or support competitive Battlefield because they don't think it's a very skill-based platform or game. Battlefield esports doesn't really appeal to the community at large, you know, as you can see in all these comments. So we just discussed the obstacles that Battlefield esports face: the player base stripping of features, you know, the lack of relatability in terms of the community versus pro scene. So you know, that's the problems that Battlefield faces. But I have 4 bullet points right here that Battlefield Esports absolutely needs to have if it wants to go anywhere off the ground. So first one is vehicles. You need to have a vehicle, an airplane or a tank or something inside of Battlefield Esports if you want to make it relatable. Plus, it adds a lot more variety and features in the game that otherwise would be just lackluster. You need infantry class of diversity. It gets very mundane and tired when you see everyone playing the same class with the same loadout. You know, Battlefield 4, everyone was assault. Everyone had an AEK with the Cobra sight, with a little stubby and sometimes a heavy. Everyone would have a G18. Everyone would have a little tiny med pack and defibrillators, and it was standard. It was less about gun skill and stuff like that. It was more about positioning, but it got very boring very quickly, and a lot of people watching Battlefield Esports for the first time didn't really have much idea what was going on. A lot of them questioned, oh, why is there no sniper, or why is there no engineer, or stuff like that. We need relatable game modes. The game mode needs to be understood by the community at large. You know, Squad Obliteration was some weird game mode that no one really understood because no one really played Obliteration. It wasn't a very popular game mode, so making Squad Obliteration was just taking a small section of what people already don't know. It needs to be something like Conquest or Rush or maybe Capture the Flag. People need to know what the game mode is and be able to play it on their own in their free time, competitively or not. And it needs to have a small player count. I've seen a lot of comments, especially on a ton of, as you can see here, a ton of these YouTube videos. I think it was like US versus EU. But a lot of people said that it should competitive Battlefield should be 32v32 or like 30v30 or 60v16, and that's just not possible. You can't have a full team of 16 players all working together. I mean, a team of 16 people wouldn't actually be a team of 16 people. It'd probably be a team of like 30 people, and there'd be subs for each single player. It's just not viable. Plus, there's too much going on. It's not easy to understand. It increases skill gap way too much to the point where it doesn't even flow together, where the viewer doesn't even understand. If you ever seen a match of like a 10v10 or an AVA game, you can tell that the caster always has a difficulty trying to spectate the players that are doing the major plays because there's just a lot going on. It's not very entertaining to watch. So those are requirements. I'm going to review it once again. Vehicles, infantry class diversity, relatable game modes, and a small player count. So now that we have these requirements, I've brainstormed a couple of game mode ideas that I think could definitely work in a competitive setting. And my first one would be 6-on-6 Conquest Small. So Conquest has always been a part of Battlefield. Everybody knows that. It's been in there since 1942. But with the 6-on-6 instead of a 5-on-5 or an 8v8, I think 6-on-6 would be large enough to make it feel chaotic, but small enough to keep it economically viable. Overwatch is 6-on-6, and that's working out great right now. So what I'm thinking is like you have your standard 5 infantry players. You know, you could have your old infantry players from all the way from Battlefield 3. Feel right at home with the 5-on-5 setting, but then you have an extra player as a vehicle, as an armored vehicle. They could be a light tank, perhaps. Maybe a fighter plane. I don't know how that would work because the map would have to be small. But it could definitely work with a light tank in there. So I think that makes the most amount of sense. And plus, with Conquest, you have more predictable spawns compared to something like Domination. Domination was more reliant on lucky spawns, random spawns, and not going over certain invisible barriers so you don't, spawn, so the enemy doesn't spawn right behind you and, flank you. So I think with the Conquest small settings, you have predictable spawns, you have very easy to understand gameplay since everyone plays Conquest. Anyone who's played Battlefield has played Conquest. Another suggestion would be 6-on-6 Rush Small, which is just like what I just mentioned. You have your 5 standard infantry players and you have your 1 extra vehicle player. But it would be Rush Small. So it would be Rush, but just on a smaller map. Something built for like a 12 player map. But Rush hasn't always been a part of the Battlefield series. It's been introduced in Battlefield Bad Company 2, but because of how much people enjoyed it and liked it, it's basically become a staple now. A third option would be 6-on-6 Operation Small. So Operations is a new game mode introduced into Battlefield 1. It's a blend of Conquest and Rush. You have your 2 or 3 objectives that you need to capture. Once you capture them and you hold on to them for a certain amount of time, you get to move on. So it's Rush in the sense that there's linearity, but Conquest in the fact that you have to hold flags. But Operations is actively played by the community as of right now. A lot of players are enjoying Operations, mostly because there's just a lot going on. You get a lot of kills, a lot of points. You have fun. Uh, it's very people know what they're doing because of the intro video clips. If everyone enjoys Operations at the moment, so it would make some sense if they made it into a competitive game with something like Operation Small or something like Squad Operations. I don't want to say Squad Operations because Squad Operations or any competitive game with the name Squad in front of it usually indicates only up to 5 players. But Squad Operation Small or whatever you want to call it, it can definitely be introduced. It would just need to have smaller maps. You have your 1 vehicle per side. You have your 5 infantry players, and you have like 3 or 4 sections of a map, and you could just whoever wins is just whoever goes farthest on the map or stuff like that, or whoever gets the most tickets, whatever. Yeah, so that's the end of the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I definitely put a lot of work and thought and effort into this. I've been thinking about making this video for a couple months now, and now that I finally got around to doing it. So if you want to leave a comment, suggestion, call me a faggot in the comments, call me a Shiba. I know that's you, Stoner. So yeah, see you guys later.
Maschinengewehr, eindeutig feindlich. Ich brauche sofort... Feindliches MG gesichtet. Verteidigt das Ziel!